Okay, and we're live, so this is being recorded and will be posted online. Nick, do you want to?
Yeah. Let's see. So there was a note about a change potentially in the next meeting date. I don't know if that was from you, Yov.
Yeah. Basically, it's a public holiday here, so I can make the same time or a different time any other day of that week, but not Thursday nor Friday. And I'm guessing other Europe-based.
It's holiday in Canada on Monday. So
Okay, that's
So maybe Tuesday the 19th or Wednesday the 20th at the 11 a is it 11 10 a.m. Pacific slot that we normally do.
that works for me.
Is there a preference between Tuesday or Thursday, or Tuesday or Wednesday?
preference for Tuesday.
Okay. Any naysayers?
Let me double check.
With me, I would rather we just skip this event and go to the next scheduled one. But I can't do Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tuesday the 19th, yeah, works for me.
It would work for me as well, I believe, if we want to do that. Probably have a smaller group. Anytime we change time or dates, we're going to get less people. So
yeah.
Why don't we pencil in for now as May 19th at the normal time?
Yeah.
Okay. For today, we have a bunch of things queued up potentially. Probably won't get to all of them, but why don't we start out at least with Nicholas? You wanted to talk about event timing updates.
Yeah, so I linked the spec there in case people don't have a link handy, and I wanted to update that we've landed the change to have a method that queries whether you should add an entry to the performance observer. It basically looks at the dictionary of the observe call, basically, and that dictionary can have a duration threshold. So if it has a duration threshold, then it compares it with the duration value of the entry, and if it's less than the threshold, then it does not send the entry to the observer. I also noticed that we still don't have a way to determine which ones to add to the buffer, the one in the performance timeline, meaning the one that's used by the performance object. So if I recall from the previous conversations, we want to add only ones that have duration greater than like 100, even though we support entries of duration greater than, well, duration 16 or more, which means we still need a way to determine which ones are buffered. So I was thinking maybe we can hack the should add entry, and if the, or have a, somehow saying should add entry, this is about the performance timeline, if that makes sense.
Sorry, Nicholas, I may have forget some of this discussion, but we're saying that you can observe things that are 16 milliseconds or greater, but the buffer itself would have a different threshold for what would be added to it.
Right.
So if you did
I'm open to changing it.
Okay.
I thought that was the agreement last time, but we can also just buffer all the entries, which means 16 or more instead of 100 more, right?
Yeah.
So my concern with buffering everything is that for pages that observe nothing, they will just accumulate those entries for every single input event. So that runs the risk of bloating memory, where if we keep it for slow events, it's likely not to be such a big deal.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
And we still do have a buffer size limit. So even if you accumulate entries, there's a limit to the memory accumulated, but it's true that we want to not have a lot.
I agree with both of those intentions. I would say we should definitely make it explicit, like call outs within the spec in a couple different places, just so people wouldn't be confused about that if they're looking at it or wondering why one of them's not getting the same results as another one.
Yeah, I do worry it can be a little confusing, that when you call the buffered flag, you get only very slow entries from the past, but then you use the duration threshold to know which entries are being received, but only in the future. That's a little confusing, but I'm not sure if there's a good alternative.
Because if you don't specify the duration threshold, is it correct that you would get all of them, like 16 milliseconds? And
Now, the default will be the slow ones.
I see.
So if you want to get more events, you would need to specify the duration threshold.
I see. That makes sense then. Okay. Okay. So if you, just to restate what you said, we will only buffer things over 100 milliseconds. And if you don't specify a threshold otherwise, if you observe it, you would only get things over 100 milliseconds. If you wanted to get something with more smaller durations, you would have to observe it, and that would not go into the buffer.
Right.
Observe it with the duration specified. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, any feedback that people have regarding how to specify this weird behavior about performance timeline buffering would be useful, and more generally, feedback regarding event timing is welcome, because in Chrome we would like to ship an implementation of the full event timing sometime soon. So it would be great to have some feedback if there is any.
Just from an Akamai perspective, we are shipping an update to our Boomerang library with full capture of all the event timing data, as well as first input delay kind of part of that. So we don't have immediate feedback right now, other than that we're starting to collect it and hope to look at the data more soon.
Right. It would be interesting to see if, so you're using a polyfill right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how it compares to event timing, I guess, once it ships. But
yep.
In terms of, I guess, the performance cost of the polyfill versus event timing, as well as the accuracy of, like, do they report similar numbers, or is it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we should have that data, so that could be a follow-up for me at some point, is to look at that difference.
Yeah.
The difference between the polyfill and the.
I do wonder, like, how do you ensure that you have a handler running at the beginning and the handler running at the end?
That's one of the downsides of the polyfill, is that we don't. So.
Right. So presumably our values, at least for the event processing time, will be larger. Mm-hmm. That's what I would expect.
Yep.
If they're not, then that's probably a problem somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
What we're telling our customers is that we expect differences because we're going to be more accurate to, from getting this data from the browser, but we don't exactly know which way the accuracy will go. So.
Right. All right. Look forward to seeing if there's differences there. Yeah. I didn't have anything else. That was my main update for event timing, just like a PSA, as well as just if anyone has specific spec opinions about how this should go, then feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I will just do it my way.
Yeah. Also, for like API customers in the crowd, if you have opinions regarding the buffering, the duration threshold, whether you will use event timing at all, if you will if that model fits the way that you would like to use it, if the answer to the previous question is yes, yeah, that would be great feedback.
Yeah, that looks good. We will use it.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that like user input generally does not occur super early on. So I'm hopeful that most of the entries will be not buffered, basically, which means the fact that we only buffer the very slow ones won't have a significant impact on like your data. That's my hope.
We could also ensure that all early input is just very slow to make sure we capture it.
What?
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Very, very slow.
Yes, I guess that works too.
Okay, wonderful. Anything else that you want to chat about for event timing there?
No, that's it from me.
Thank you.
I do want to say Philip wanted to be in the page visibility discussion, but
okay.
he's busy until 30-minute mark. So if we can do something before that.
That sounds good. Why don't we skip over that for the moment? So let's jump into resource timing, I guess. So we have a bunch of issues listed. I think the first group of them, so starting with resource timing issue number 71, which just talks about our transition plans to getting resource timing to CR. This issue was filed a long time ago, and it's kind of a tracking issue for things that we need to get done in order to get there. There is a list of open issues in level 2 that I think it might be worthwhile for us to just review. And then there's also a bunch of issues from recently that have no milestone that we may want to just decide what level they belong to. So the first issue in currently tagged level 2 that we have not closed out yet is just issue number 1. Actually, I don't even have it on the list. 198. And I was just mentioning this really quick. This is from Philippe. He's just saying that we should make sure to register the timing allow origin as a header once we move it to CR. So obviously, I don't think we can make any progress on that yet. So that one will wait until we are ready for it. The second one was issue number 200. This is be a bit more explicit about which sub-resources are to be ignored from style sheets. I can summarize it really quick. Nicholas pointed out that if we have like a dependency tree of resources and one of those style sheets is cross-origin fetched with no cores, what do we do about like grandchildren resources? Are they explicitly ignored or not? And I think at the end of it, with the discussion, you were trying to figure out how to adequately describe in words kind of what this dependency tree might be.
Yes. Basically, I tried to write down some language that describes what we want, which is basically everything in that dependency tree should be invisible, without actually needing to specify that dependency tree, and bearing with the fact that all those resource loads happen from CSS, which is like everything that is resource loading related is underspecified there, not integrated to fetch or anything really. And yeah, so I had a hard time figuring out the language, but I think I just need to get back to that and find something that is, at worst hand wavy, but describes what we like, the behavior that we want from this, and we can, then put an action item that if and when CSS will integrate with fetch, we will better describe it and somehow, define the ancestry relationship in fetch and then rely on that somehow. But I think that as long as CSS is not integrated with fetch, there is no point in even going that route because it won't help us here.
So kind of some hand-wavy boilerplate for the moment until we get to that point?
I think so. I think that would be the best we can do.
Okay.
And then tests that make sure that this is actually what's implementation are currently doing, that I don't think we actually know that this is true for any of the implementations. So
okay.
Then we can see, like once we have tests, we can see. Yeah. Which one pass and what other action items implementations need to go, what else they need to, people need to do in order to get it to pass.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is really just work needs to happen. There's already, it's quite clear what needs to be done, I think.
Yep. Okay, that sounds good. So those were the 2 open issues for level 2. Besides that, obviously, I think we have tests. The last time you audited this, was it last February? I'm not sure if we've made any progress from that. You had posted in issue number 71.
Yes, I can take an action item to update 71 with, there's probably tests that are since passing, maybe more tests that we added that don't. I need to take an action item on that.
Okay. Okay. The rest of the issues, I believe, are newer issues that have been filed that we do not yet have. We haven't decided whether they're level 2 or level 3, so I was figuring, why don't we just go through them and figure out what we need to do to move them forward a bit, if anything that we can right now. First one is issue number 226. This is from Nicholas, pass the realm when creating performance resource timing. It sounds to me, based on the discussions that I read from this, it's similar to another change that you're making, Nicholas. But we need to wait for this fetch spec to define this better.
Well, apparently no one knows what's the right answer, but everyone's presumably implementing it, so it's kind of like an editorial change. And yeah, I guess it can wait until the fetch integration happens.
Okay. Would this be level 2 still?
Fetch integration would be level 3.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, so unless we have a clearance, basically, I don't think the change here is something that is highly observable or likely to impact the API shape. Or it's not necessarily even a change. It's just we need to properly define it. Right now, it's not, but it would be hard to do that before fetch integration. So it can wait unless, if, yeah, maybe we can try to have more high bandwidth conversations with Anna and see if it can be resolved before. But I'm not sure that's the case.
Yeah. Well, if there's no implementers having issues knowing basically which frame should be the one having which entries, then that's basically what the issue is about. So I wouldn't think it's high priority if there's no questions about that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. The next one is issue number 220, opened by Yov a couple months ago. Provide a TAO bypass for navigation timing. And my understanding is because navigation timing is built on top of the resource timing thing, and a lot of the resource timing attributes are kind of gated by TAO, where nav timing isn't because it is the navigation. It doesn't really make sense. So this might just need some spec language, Yov, to make it clear that nav timing timestamps aren't affected by TAO.
Yes, there's some confusion there around the definition of the entries, and we need to clear it up. So it's mostly editorial.
Okay. That would be a level 2?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything here that you think is that we need to discuss, or is it more of just kind of working on the language to get it right?
I don't think we need to discuss this. Basically, there were a bunch of navigation. I guess there are multiple types of navigation timing entries here. One is things like things that concern the document that is being fetched, which is always same origin and therefore like to itself, and therefore it's always like they're always passing the timing allow origin check, but there may be some confusion there in terms of the language. And then there are the entries that are related to the previous document. So the
Right.
unload event duration and redirects that led to the current document. And those, they were timing allow origin bound, but we removed it because it just doesn't make sense. So we made them same origin bound. And we need to clarify that. But I think these are all decisions that we've made last year during and after the face-to-face. And so I don't think it requires any further discussion. It just needs to be like the language needs to be clarified, and as well as potentially tested. I believe it's tested, but we need to make sure that it is.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so those were the easy ones, I'll call them, maybe. The next batch, there's 3 separate issues, 221, 222, and 223, which seem to have come from part of the ping review process. One of them is around consider removing next hop protocol. Another one is around consider removing the wildcard option for TAO. And the third one is actually related to TAO as well, but I guess for different reasons. The discussions themselves are somewhat lengthy, and obviously people here can go through and read them. I guess my question is, what are our next steps for trying to resolve some of these?
So I think that some of those issues raise meaningful concerns that we should take into account and somehow modify certain things. So maybe we can dive into the issues one by one and see, because they are separate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's start with 221.
Okay.
Basically, the concern here is that the next hop protocol is running a risk of exposing exposing unique network condition that the visitor is behind, because it exposes the what is that last mile protocol, which may vary in different conditions. So if users are behind a proxy or a VPN or have an antivirus, or like there are and MITMing antivirus. There are many things that can change that first hop. I think one of the most immediate things that this has raised is the fact that timing allow like next hop protocol, I believe as it is right now, is not timing allow origin bound, and it probably should be, but this is a somewhat of a tangent to this question, because a server can mark a resource as timing allow origin if it enables them to observe conditions of the user's conditions, and beyond that, that it's not necessarily cross origin concern.
Right.
So I guess the question is, are we okay with exposing VPN/proxy usage, or do we need to rethink the attribute, or what do we think?
So my initial thinking on that front is that it doesn't expose anything specific. So it's rather a binary supports H2 versus not supports H2, or supports quick versus doesn't support quick. And these are all things that are already somewhat observable. Because at least the move between H2 and like H1 and H2, there are very clear request patterns that you can observe just from resource timing, related to whether you're using one protocol or the other. Just in terms of connection times, in H2 you have a single connection, where in to a single host, where for H1 you have multiples. So my claim is that this information is already exposed. So having a more clear signal about that is not doesn't add any information. And proxies that are privacy aware should be able to support, they can support, nothing is preventing them from supporting H2 or H3. It's just a technical limitation.
And you're saying those proxies could just mirror the origin to make sure that they're not.
Yeah, that's
But would the proxy know? I mean, like, if you just have a single, the proxy doesn't know the connection until it has already been requested the resource by the browser, right?
That is correct. Yes, so you're saying, yeah, that is true. they can somehow keep track of it, but it will be tricky to do that in retrospect.
Yeah.
That is a good point. Generally, I think that this is not not a new, like, this is something we have taken into consideration when we shipped Nextcloud protocol. So it's not a new consideration. What do folks think about this in terms of risk, in particular, Benjamin? Do you?
Yeah, we're concerned about this. I mean, I think Ping really pointed out a valid issue here.
So, yeah, I'm not. And in terms of the fact that this information is already exposed, is that not a convincing argument?
Can you clarify exactly how it's already exposed?
So if I'm looking at multiple connections, like multiple requests sent to a single host, if I have connection time only on the first one, and beyond that, all of them are seemingly using the same connection, versus connection time that is, repeats itself over multiple, over multiple connections. This is basically H1 is using 6 TCP connections. Each one of them is connecting separately, where H2 is not. I'm guessing we can, so this is a very obvious detection mechanism. I'm guessing between H2 and H3, there are subtle, like the differences are more subtle. And like the end server can potentially cause explicit packet losses in order to, weed out the differences between H3 and H2, but that's a bit harder. But for H1 versus H2, it's just very easy to write a script that does that distinction. So I'm not sure what would the real privacy benefits here would be. At the same time, Nick raises a good point that without learning ahead of time what protocols each host supports, proxies will have a hard time fighting that regardless of the detection method.
Do
you think that's an adequate response to Ping?
I believe so. I would love, I'd love to run it by some Chrome and Google privacy folks that may tell me that I'm horribly wrong about this.
Yeah, I would suggest doing that. I mean, have you thought in a hypothetical way of what they're asking to do here? Like, what do you see the harm in actually conceding to their request?
The harm in removing next hop protocol is that we won't be able to easily segment the impact of underlying protocol rollouts on traffic.
And you're especially interested in that due to Quick.
We're interested due to, first of all, H2 to H1 rollout is not done. There are still properties that are making that transition and want to prove to themselves that it's a worthy one, and this enables them to measure that. And then, yes, similarly, H3 versus H2 will enable to measure, switch some part of the traffic to the new protocol, measure the differences, see that it's good, and then continue. At the same time, and this, it may be hard to deploy, but when we shipped next hop protocol, we didn't really have server timing. Maybe server timing can serve as a similar purpose for segmenting that traffic. But I don't know, and maybe Nick can tell me if I'm wrong about this being feasible from a layering perspective.
Yeah, and I guess I would just like to mirror from Akamai's point of view how useful it has been for our customers for those exact same reasons. For their rollouts, obviously we support different protocols, and customers can turn them on or off for their properties, and they want to make sure that there aren't any major regressions when they're segmenting half their traffic to H2 or some domains or some users and stuff like that. As well as also, same here, testing our internal support for new protocols as we deploy them to all of our customers. We can see kind of in real time what the performance is. So both from our customers' point of view and our Akamai infrastructure's point of view, having NextHop protocol is pretty valuable for us. As far as whether it could be on server timing, I think we'd have to think through that a little bit. One of the challenges with server timing is, it can come from multiple different hops along the origin, and especially if you have like a multi-tier setup. They could all be adding their server timing headers about the various things that they think about, where we really only want kind of the final actual end user connection, which is what NextHop protocol is. But there's probably ways around that too. So I don't know, I think I'd have to think through it a little bit and ask some of our folks internally about it a bit more.
Yeah, so maybe we can take that as homework, where I can talk to Chrome and Google privacy folks, and Nick, you can see if you whether server timing can be a viable alternative. I can also see if because the problem here, just to make it more explicit, server timing is something that is set by the application layer and is done before the last hop. Basically before the network stack makes a decision on where this what protocol. Not before it makes a decision, but it's done independently to the layer that is making that decision. So basically, it would require the network layer to somehow taint those requests going up, and then having the application layer mark that as server timing going down. So it's potentially feasible, but involves extra work for those tier deployments.
True. But I mean, if there are real security concerns here, then
I agree that if there are real security concerns, then extra work is tough.
So yeah, I
but
think we need to do some digging here as a next step and see, and then share with the group and see if we get agreement on what to do.
yeah.
Yep, that sounds fair. Okay, so thanks for the discussion on that. There are two other related ones around timing allow origin, but I did see that Philip had joined, and I was wondering if we could switch back to page visibility and kind of go over those two issues. Does that sound okay to everyone? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to be talking about page visibility issue number 29 and kind of a related paint timing issue number 40. Which are related to logging if a page ever was visible, and I think the discussion's kind of rounded out to being something around a page visibility observer. I don't know if there's one to jump in.
Yeah, the recap is we had two options here to surface visibility changes that occur early on during the page, because right now we have an event handler for visibility changes, but of course you don't get any updates about changes that occurred before you register the handler. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. And there's one option was setting or something else explicitly on the performance entry, so that you know this entry occurred basically. So the page was backgrounded at some point before this entry occurred. So that's one of the options that we had. And the other option is to have a page visibility observer that can have buffering, so you can have the full history basically of the visibility changes of the page. So I sent an email thread to public WebPerf. There seemed to be agreement about the observer way. However, there is some pushback on the paint timing issue in particular from Mike Sharoff, who is saying that it should still be something explicit in the entry so that developers don't get like basically confused about this and don't forget to exclude these entries if they're trying to like aggregate. For example, for paint timing, obviously that can make a huge difference, because if you just open in the background and then come back to it, then the first paint value would be extremely high.
Yeah, to put that another way, I think it was a discoverability issue that he was concerned about. A developer would have to know that page visibility affects paint timing in order to exclude it. Whereas if there's an entry explicitly, if there's a flag on the entry explicitly, they might discover it there. I mean, in both cases, the guidance on the web will have to be pretty clear. But it did seem to me like it would be easier for developers to discover this if it was on the entry. And from my own experience with promoting FCP and LCP externally and looking at writing sample code where I did not include this check, thinking that, oh, this is a simple case, I want to write my sample code to be as simple as possible. I have now seen many, many cases on the internet where people are not checking this case. And so I think just having something as simple as possible would be ideal. The other concern I had is that if the page visibility observer is async and the FCP observer and the LCP observer are also async, you kind of get into this situation where you have to await both of them and then compare afterward. Like you can't just check some flag in your FCP observer. You have to check, wait to make sure that the page visibility observer has fired the entry, and then wait until both of those are done, and then determine whether or not you want to record that entry. And so it's a little bit awkward. When I was talking with Nicholas off the thread, my point was that I think we should do both. I think having the page visibility information available is really helpful in general, but I still think we should have some kind of flag on the entry that says like the user agent thinks that maybe you shouldn't trust this entry because of whatever reason. Maybe the page was in the background, maybe DevTools was open, maybe it's running on WebDriver tests, or there's some other thing that's happening. I don't know. I think there are so many possible reasons why in the future we might not want to trust an entry that just having it as a general option could be interesting.
Yeah, so I think that last point is the most meaningful one, because yes, Page Visibility Observer will give us a full picture as to whether, how impacted was the resource, and will enable folks to, create a better image and maybe decide that pages that were backgrounded, but, for a small fraction of time, are still counted as something else, and, enable people to observe how visibility impacts performance. But visibility is not necessarily the only thing that will involve tainting, and maybe like having both, I guess it's just a question of resources and how hard it would be to add support for both, but it seems to be valuable.
Well, one thing is, right now we would only have one tainted reason, which is background, right? I don't think we're at a position where we have to find throttling of any kind. And making that interoperable seems tricky.
So
do we need a reason, or I don't know if this was discussed earlier, but
I guess in the GitHub issue, the person was suggesting having a reason instead of just having a Boolean.
If we're like, so let's say for resource timing, we have a page that's being like a history navigation that happens mid something. So for example, during a long task, that is potentially another reason for it, like an operation to be not a valid long task entry, I guess. Right? I mean,
and are you arguing for that? Or against that?
No, I'm just thinking of like, I agree that right now it will mostly be related to visibility, but I don't think that in the future it will necessarily be that, and we will probably discover over time other events that impact different entry types.
Right. So
a similar example, layout. I was gonna say layout shifts kind of have this already. We have a flag that says includes recent input or had recent input or something like that. It's conceptually similar. And we added that specifically because we didn't want people to have to deal with timestamps with events and then like manually exclude. But we kept the entry being dispatched in case they wanted to for some reason.
Yeah.
If we do have some sort of flag around the taint reason, we probably want to have it be an array, because there may be multiple reasons why something was tainted too, right? I don't know. It seems to start going down a rabbit hole a little bit.
Yes, a little bit. I mean, initially we could have just, an array which will be either empty array or an array containing the single string background. So like it'll be an array of dumb strings, and it may have more things in the future, but initially it would have only those two options. That would be, yeah, that would be one way to do it. What do other people think?
My opinion is that the reason is not super important, but I'm also perfectly happy to have a reason if people do think it's important.
The reason will enable people, for example, to look into Visibility Observer if it's visibility related, but do something else if it's, you know, DevTools was open or whatever.
Yeah, I see the value in it. Certainly, I just think that and if we're worried about going down the rabbit hole, it does simplify things to not have to have all the reasons enumerated in the spec.
The
I mean, sure, but if you want to use it as a Boolean, you just check whether the array is empty or not, right? So
I do see frustration with APIs that we produce when we don't provide supporting information about the information that we provide. You know, like if we start saying this is tainted, then the first question is going to be why. Because otherwise there's nothing that they can, well, they can act on it by like not throwing it away, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't understand why they should throw it away or segment
yeah,
it into something else, you know.
If we're gonna do this for all the entries as opposed to just paint timing or paint timing and largest contentable paint, then like having a painted like user timing entry is not at all the same as paint timing entry, because for user timing you might still want to use those in many cases, right?
Right.
Also, I guess for resource timing, if DevTools is on and network throttling is enabled, that's another tainting reason. Like, or we can find many different. Yeah, I guess maybe the problem there would be that we now have to think and enumerate all those different cases where something is tainted, but maybe we can take that on a, like, you know, iterative basis and add them over time as we run into them.
The tainted registry.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Just the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
We are getting close to time being up for this. I guess, what do we feel like our next steps here? We're still discussing it obviously a little bit. It does feel like there's two presented options and both of them seem fairly well supported by various people. It seems like there was a lot of broad support for Page Viz Observer for not just this, but for other reasons. So I feel like that one's a kind of a no-brainer to go forward with. And maybe we just continue the discussion and paint timing issue number 40 or somewhere related for the tainted attribute specifically to see if it would be useful, or the pluses and minuses of going down that path. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do see the value in the attribute. It's just a matter of how complex do we want our performance entries to be.
Yeah.
But
okay. All right, that's all for today. Just as a reminder, we're changing the meeting time for the next one to 2 Tuesdays from now instead of Thursday. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.